Good afternoon, good morning wherever you are. Gareth from the iMoot team here. I'd like to welcome James McQuillan, who's going to give an excellent presentation on creating flexible, scalable user interfaces. Thank you for taking the time and looking forward to this really good presentation.
Great, thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the iMoot so far and learning a lot of things. I'm James McQuillan. I'm a developer for Remote Learner. We're a Moodle partner, and I work on Ellis, which is our enterprise add-on for Moodle. So today I'm going to be talking about creating flexible, scalable user interfaces. We recently had some problems in Ellis with scalability, dealing with lots of data that we didn't anticipate. And we undertook a project to improve this. And these are some of the lessons that we learned doing this. So, first of all, this presentation is going to be talking about scaling interfaces from small amounts of data to large amounts of data. So this is specifically what you're displaying on the screen. This isn't about responsive design or scaling to mobile devices, that sort of thing. We're just talking about how to manage lots and lots of data and making it easy to use. So if you have 100,000 users, for example, 1,000, 10,000 courses, an interface that wasn't designed for that amount of data can become very hard to use when you add that amount of data. But when you're dealing with that sort of size of information, you also want to make sure that it's a powerful interface. You want to give the user tools to manage all that data, to do big bulk actions, to be able to find a specific piece of information in a giant data set. So there's a couple tools that you can use to make that sort of interface. The scalability is very, very important in any application, but especially in a sort of Moodle type application where you could have many, many users and many courses. If you design your interface with scalability in mind, you're going to make your users' lives a lot easier. If you give them the tools to very easily find a particular user or a course within a big list, they're not going to have to spend hours and hours searching for something, or if they want to enroll 1,000 people, they can do it easily versus doing it each individually. So those are sort of benefits that we want to get with this concept. And you want to make sure that your application can grow. I mean, you might only be dealing with 100 students right now, or even 1,000 students, but maybe you want to grow to 100,000 students or 1,000,000 students. Maybe that's not something that you're interested in right now, but it's somewhere you want to be. You want to make sure that your interface can get there. And very important aspect of this is being nice to your servers. If you're going to show a list with 1,000 users or 100,000 users or 1,000 courses, it's going to be very, very server intensive to load that page. A lot of times these sort of problems are solved by just adding more server capacity, but with a little thought into the design of the page and the design of the interface, you can maintain a powerful interface and be a lot nicer to your servers, offload some of the work to the design. Now, scalability is important in any kind of user interaction. So this is something we're probably all familiar with. Maybe not the first example there, but TV remotes and channels. Originally, when you had 20 channels or something like that, you had a dial on your TV, and that was fine because that amount of channels could fit on that dial fairly easily. And it was easy to switch and all that, and nobody really thought that you would have many more than that. So you didn't really need an interface that would scale. But when you started adding 100, 1,000 channels, you can't really fit that all on a single dial. So in the middle picture, we have your modern sort of TV remote, and with 10 different buttons, the number of buttons, you can enter any channel from 1 to 1,000 or higher. But that only does one function. On the right, the most scalable type of interface here would be some sort of touchscreen that can change its display and change its input based on what you're doing. So this is an example of going from a non-scalable interface to something that's very scalable. Now, taking this to the web, these are some examples from Ellis that illustrate the same point. On the left, we have just a simple select box that lists every single option that you have in the system, and there's no, there's sorting there, it's sorted in a particular order, but there's no searching. You can't change the sorting. You can't find them on these entities, and you have to load them all at once. So if you had 100,000 options here, your server would have to go and fetch all this information and put it all into. It makes the page slow to load. And that's an example of an interface that might work fine if you had 10 options, but you can't really grow that past a certain level. On the right is a more scalable way to do this sort of selection. This is what's known as an autocomplete or type ahead kind of input. When you start typing, it will go and match what you've typed against all the options in the database for that type of student or course or whatever. This searches on multiple pieces of information as well. So you don't just see the name, you see the username, ID number. You can add other pieces of information here too. And just starting to type a couple letters, you can reduce a large data set down to a manageable amount. And you only have to display 10 results here, for example, to get somebody the information they need to make a selection. This is a lot easier on your servers, a lot easier on the user, and a lot easier to find what the user is looking for. Now, when you're designing a scalable interface, there are basically 4 steps you want to go through. You first want to define your parameters. You want to identify your problems, your current problems. You want to choose your strategies to fix those problems, and you want to develop your interface at scale. Now, to start, you want to understand what your users are and what your data is. You want to define your parameters. So who are your users? What can they do? What sort of browsers do they have? What can their browsers do? What sort of interactions are they familiar with? Can they do things like drag and drop? Or are they just comfortable with clicking? What information do they need? Do they need all of the information at once? Do they only need parts of the information? For example, do they need to see a user's address, city, postal code, zip code, phone number? Do they need to see that all at once, or can they just start with the name and go from there, add more information if they need it? And what do they need to accomplish? Do they need to just find a user and then send them a message, for example? Do they need to edit a single user? Do they need to edit lots of users at once? Or do they need to enroll lots of users at once? So it's very important to understand what sort of workflow your users are going to be using. Because if you design an interface for something that they're not doing, it might be scalable, but it's still going to be not helpful. The next big thing to understand is your data. How big is the information that you're dealing with? If you're dealing with 100,000 users, great. Maybe you want to go one step above and design it for 1 million. But if you are only thinking 10,000 users, for example, there's no reason to design an interface for 1 billion, because you're really going to be hampering your interface for a scale that's not really practical at the moment. You can always improve it later. You can add things, remove things as time goes on and your scale grows, but you want to stay realistic. You also want to understand what sort of information that you are displaying. Is it searchable information? Is there a lot of text information that can be matched against a search string? Is it just listable? Can you display it all in a list, or does it have some unique method that it has to be displayed? And is it all important all the time? And this is something, again, you'll learn when you define your users. But do you have to display all the information all the time? Is it always important? you don't want to display anything that isn't important because it just clutters up your interface. Now, the next, you want to identify your current problems. So look at your interfaces now and say what works, what doesn't work. If you have any pages with really long lists or the infamous scroll of death, where you're just displaying a whole lot of things on a page and the user just has to scroll and scroll and scroll to get to where they're going, that's a big red flag. If there's any pages that you're doing lots of editing, big bulk edits, things like that, and you click away from it, or you search for a different piece of information, and all those changes are lost, that's going to be very, very frustrating to the user. And if it's difficult to locate what the user is searching for with unusual criteria. So once you've understood what is important to the user, you want to make sure that they can then find the information based on what's important to them. So for example, if you are presenting a search box to find a course or a user, and you can only search on the user name or the course name, but the user wants to search by address or by city, or by, say, a custom user field. If that's important to them and they can't do it, then that's going to be frustrating to them as well. And do you need to display all this information at once? If you have pages that display every single piece of information and you're scrolling horizontally and vertically and there's tons of information on the page that isn't necessarily necessary, then you can probably reduce that. Not only is it going to be easier on your servers not to display all that information, but it's going to be visually more simple. And if you have any pages that take a long time to load, a lot of the time this is caused by loading too much information on the page. So you can identify slow pages and say, well, what is slowing the page down, and can we reduce some of the information that's causing that long load time? Next step, you want to choose your strategies. So based on what you know about your users, about your data, and the problems that you've identified in the last step, you want to decide what sort of strategies will work to improve this. Now, unfortunately, there's not one fix for making an interface scalable. Every sort of interface is different, every piece of data is different, and all users are different. So there are a number of strategies, but you have to choose which ones work for you based on what you've learned so far. Some good strategies for this are searching and filtering. So if you have a lot of text data, it's very, very easy to reduce a large data set down to a manageable amount by just giving the user a simple search box. They start typing and you can reduce 100,000 users down to a manageable amount very quickly with just a couple letters. If you are searching on a piece of information that has some fixed values, say cities or countries, it's probably more useful to provide a filtering type interface than a free text search box. This is a sort of interface where you would just list the options and allow a user to choose one or multiple values. Pages. Pages don't get a lot of respect. A lot of people don't like pages, but they are useful. You don't want to display every single search result or piece of information on a page because it's too much for the user to really search through. And it's going to make the page very slow to load. So pages are good, but the problem with pages is when you force the user to look through all of their pages to find what they're looking for. I mean, if the user has to flip to the 20th page, you've got other problems. If you think Google searches, for example, you hardly ever even look at the second page of results. Next page, so they're good to have, but don't force the user to flip through all of them. Provide them other strategies to get the information right at the top of the results. And you want to use modern web technology. You want to use use modern web technology to power these sort of strategies. If you are reloading the page a lot and doing a complete page reload, this gives the feeling of your interface being a lot slower. It's also a lot harder to maintain sessions when you have to refresh the entire page. You have to save it on the back end, re-render it. If you use modern technology, AJAX requests, rewriting the page dynamically, those sort of things, you can reduce server resources for one, because you're only fetching a certain piece of information, and you can make your interface feel a lot faster and a lot more powerful. If you do need bulk actions, it's important to give a sort of bulk session to the user. So allow them to search through the data that they're looking through, collect the entities they want to edit on the side somewhere, and then allow them to edit that as a whole. This sort of gives them an idea of what they've collected and what they're going to edit, and helps to prevent them losing their changes. And as I mentioned before, you don't want to display too much information. You want to only display the information that the user is currently interested in. Anything else is just a lot of visual noise that's going to clutter up the interface. And you want to allow the user to customize the interface as well. So if they can set certain preferences to display information that's always going to be important to them, then that's a huge plus for that. Or if you change the interface based on what they're currently doing, it's going to tailor the interface to the user, going to give them the interface that they want, show them the information that they're interested in, and keep things that are irrelevant to them out of the view. Now, learning is something that's very difficult to do right and well, but if you can accomplish it, it's a very, very powerful feature. This is a sort of interface where over time you learn about what is important to the user, you see their sort of workflow, and you adjust the interface to them. Now, if you get it wrong, it's very frustrating. And if you are attempting to implement this sort of interface, you want to give the user the ability to change it or not force them into what you think they want to do. Often you won't be right. A more easy way to implement this sort of solution is to do it with caching. So on the back end, if you've realized the user is always interested in a certain piece of information, you can pre-cache that and give that information to them faster. But if you're wrong, the worst thing that happens is the cache doesn't get used. So that's a way to speed up the interface and use some learning technology in there. But the bottom line here is to keep it simple and make it powerful. You want to present an interface to the user that someone who has never used your application before can sit down, do something simple, and get their work done. But provide tools so that as they become more experienced with your interface and your application, they can do more powerful things. Now next, you want to develop your interface at scale. If you are developing an interface that is designed to handle 100,000 users, 10,000 courses, whatever, create that information and see how it works with that size of data. You can't really predict how an interface is going to work with a small amount of data. You really have to see it work with a realistic type of data set. You want to test all the sort of bulk actions, searches that you want to do. Do very, very complex searches and filters and see how your server handles it. See how the interface handles it. Does it get too complicated to have a whole lot of different searches and filters going on? And do you need to improve that? But a very important point here is that once you've developed at the larger end of your size of data, you want to make sure that you're not hurting the interface when you're dealing with a small amount of data. So for example, if you provided a way to edit 10,000 users at once, But to do that, you have to add them to a bulk panel or add them to some sort of saved session that you can edit later. If someone's only interested in editing one user, there's no reason to force them to add it to a bulk session or a panel or something like that. Just allow them to do that directly. So you want to provide an interface that works for a large amount of data and for a small amount of data. And it's just as fast on either end. The fifth step of the 4 steps to scalability, you want to iterate your interface. Get something done, put it out there, see how your users are using it. See what works, see what doesn't work, see what you need to improve on. You don't have to get it right the first time. Just get it done and put something out there. Improvement is probably better than what you started with. So it's important to evolve your interface over time. Sorry, everybody, I'm just waiting for the slides to change here. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am a developer for Ellis within Remote Learner. And recently we had some problems with scalability. Some of our old interfaces weren't growing as well as we had hoped with larger amounts of information. We were getting complaints from some users that interfaces were hard to use or information was hard to find. So we undertook a project to improve this. Now, as I said, enrolling 100 students, for example, was a pretty big pain with our existing interfaces. 1,000 students was just impractical, and we had to come up with different solutions for this type of workflow. And 10,000 users, anything more than that was simply impossible. It was very hard to find the specific users, programs, courses that a user wanted to find because we only gave them limited searching options. Bulk actions were quite cumbersome. They would often break, lose changes. There were lots of entire page reloads and all sorts of complicated caching and session management, and it just needed a refresh. There were too many inputs on the page as well. There is certain amounts of information you need to enter when you're, for example, enrolling a user. But all these inputs were displayed all the time, and it just took up a lot of space that wasn't necessary until you actually wanted to enroll the user. And the main complaint we had was our interfaces required too many clicks, or they were too clicky. And this was really a problem with how we were doing things. You needed to set certain inputs to do other things. You needed to refresh an entire page to go from page to page. And you needed to search through pages to find what you were looking for. So this all required a lot of steps and a lot of clicks and a lot of reloading just to get something simple done. So as I said, we undertook a project to improve our interface scalability, and this was called Project DeepSight. So going through the steps I outlined before, we first defined our parameters. So we were looking at supporting the Moodle 2.3 minimum requirements, which meant IE8. Now that was a bit of a pain. As we know, IE8 is not the best at supporting some of the more advanced features we wanted to do. But at least we weren't working with IE6. So we had somewhere to go. We could do certain things like drag and drop. We just had to make sure that IE8 would support that. And we did want to do some more advanced interactions. We wanted to do drag and drop. But some of our users couldn't do that sort of interaction. They weren't used to that sort of interface. So we had to provide a simple alternative as well. So anytime that there was an advanced interaction, we had to provide a simple way to do that as well. The simple way might be a bit longer to do it, might require a little more clicks than the advanced interaction, but it was important to keep it there for people who weren't ready to go to the more advanced interactions. And we chose 100,000 for our upper limit, so we were looking at 100,000 users, 100,000 courses, any type of information. 100,000 was the limit that we were testing on. And we did have searchable and filterable information. So I've talked a lot about users. Users have lots of just text information, which is really easy to search through. We did have custom fields, so we did have to provide a way for the user to add fields and support fields that they've defined that we don't necessarily know about beforehand. And we did have different types of data. So we had not just plain text, but we had dates, we had choices, switches, and these types of data required their own kind of search interface or filter interface. You want to, for example, on a date, provide, say, a date picker or a calendar. And that makes it easier for the user to choose that information when they're trying to search through it. So, identifying our problems. This was our original enrollment page. Now you can see we do have some information over here. This just lists the user's name and ID number. It's pretty important information, but there's not a lot of information there. If the user wants to see any sort of other information, addresses, cities, countries, it's not available to them. And you can see over, there we go, okay. You can see over on the side here, we have a whole lot of input boxes that don't tell you actually want to enroll the user. This information takes up a lot of space on the page. We seem to be getting some connection problems. Okay, we might be back. Okay, can everybody hear me right now? Okay, might have just had a little connection hiccup there. So on the side here, we have a whole lot of input boxes that don't really do a whole lot until the user actually wants to enroll the user. This is just a whole lot of visual noise that's not relevant until the user actually wants to do something with the user. It takes up a lot of space on the page. It takes up a lot of resources to load the page, and it takes up space that we could better use for displaying more information. Now up at the top, we do have some searching and some filtering here, but this is very non-specific. So we have a search box that allows a user to input a search query, but it doesn't say what exactly the user is searching on. We can assume that it's probably searching on either the ID number or the name since they're displayed there, but we don't know until we actually do the search. And that can be frustrating if your guess is wrong and it searches something completely different. At the top, we do have a name filter with a bunch of letters, but it's also not clear what that is searching on. Is that going to filter by first name or by last name or ID number? We don't know. And beyond that, there's only two options there. You can search on the name or whatever that search box filters on. Not a whole lot of flexibility here. Now this is another interface we have, and this is something similar to what I showed you originally. This is a big long select box with a whole bunch of options in it, and there's no way to filter this information, to search on it, or even to sort it in different ways. And it displays every single piece of information at once. This is going to be very slow to load if you have a lot of information, and going to be very hard on your servers, and going to be very hard for the user to find what they're looking for. This is something you definitely want to avoid. Now this page we're getting a little bit better. We have multiple different filters at the top, and we're only displaying information at the bottom. This is a lot simpler an interface, and it's going to be a lot easier for the user to find what they're looking for. But if we see this Show Advanced button here, if we click that, we get all of these filters displayed. Now this gives us a lot of options for searching, but this also lists all custom fields, all user fields. If you have a lot of fields to search on, this particular interface is going to get very unscalable. If you had, say, 1,000 custom user fields that are displayed here, it's going to be very, very hard to use. So we chose our strategies to deal with our definitions and our problems. We wanted to replace all these interfaces with a single dynamic table. So this table would show a small amount of information at the start, but as the user added additional filters or additional searches, more information would be added or removed from the table as needed. We use JavaScript and asynchronous loading dynamic page rewrites to reduce full page loads. So once you've loaded the table, you are never going to reload the entire page. There are going to be requests made in the background for additional information, and that's going to be loaded into the page, but you're never going to have to refresh the entire page. This made the interface seem a lot faster. We also never showed inputs unless they were specifically requested. So all the information that's shown in a table, until the user actually indicates they want to do something with an entity, is information about that entity. We don't show any of the inputs unless they actually want to start an action. And we only show fields when they're requested. So as I said, we start with a small amount of information and then add more information as it's requested. You could add multiple filters to the table, so you could add multiple different searches on different pieces of information and create a custom search that showed you the information you wanted. And we had different types of filters for different data. So on a field that contains date information, we have a date picker. On fields that only have a limited amount of options, like a city or a country, we have an option chooser sort of interface where you can just choose the value. And for text information that has many different values, names, addresses, that sort of thing, we have just a plain input text box. And we did want to allow bulk actions for the entities. So we wanted to allow the user to edit everybody that matched a certain search, for example, or enrolled everybody from a certain city, for example. So we had a sort of bulk panel where you could add users to the bulk panel and collect them. When you're ready to do something with it, then you can do that action to everybody that you've collected. I haven't looked at AngularJS for that, but I hear a lot of good things about it. Right now we're using a combination of just plain JavaScript and jQuery. But some sort of framework for doing that can definitely clean some of that up, and something I might look at in the future. Another important button we added was an Add All Search Results button. So when you filter your data to a certain search, you can then add all of those users to this bulk panel and do something with the search as a whole. If you want to select individual users, you can drag and drop them into this bulk panel, or you can click them and then press a button, and then they will be added. So this is the sort of advanced interaction with a simple fallback that I was talking about earlier. And we did develop this at scale, so we did create 100,000 users to test this. And we ran the interface using that data. We performed big searches, 10 different fields, all searching different information. And we enrolled and edited large amounts of users at once. And this wasn't on big fast machines or anything like this. This was just on our local development machines to see how the information would be processed by the server, whether it was fast, whether it was slow, whether our browsers could handle it. You really want to understand how that information and that interface is going to work at scale with a lot of information, complex searches. So this is what we came up with. Let's zoom in here a little bit. So this is our enrollment page that we currently have. As you can see, this is a table that is only displaying user information right now. We've gotten rid of all those input boxes that I showed earlier. And this is just listing the ID number and the first and last name of the user. Now at the top, we have a list of filters here. And these filters initially show very simple information. But you can add additional filters and choose the information that you want to search on. So when you add an additional filter, you then get another column added to the table. So right here, I've added this city filter, and you can see that we now have a city column. So when you are interested in additional information, only then is it shown to you. Up until that point, we assume it's not relevant and we don't show it. And as you add more filters, you get more information displayed in the table. So here I've added an address filter at the top, and now we have an address column here. So you can be interested in lots of information and add that to the table and see all that information there, and you can sort it, you can search on it, and if you are not interested in that information, then you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't take up space. So this is an example of how you would search on a field that has a limited amount of options. So we have users that have 5 different cities here. And this could be as many cities as you want. You see we do have a search box here, so this will search additional options. These are the sort of top 5 most popular options here. So when you click an option, say Toronto, for example, the table refreshes and only shows people from Toronto. And again, this happens without a page reload. So the table itself will refresh its information and only show the information that you've selected. You can then go back and choose an additional value, and now you will see people both from Toronto and New York. So you can choose multiple cities to display on that and choose as many cities as you want. And see we have here people from Toronto and New York displayed in the table now. Now this filter is just a plain text free-form filter. You start typing it and it will match what you've typed against the first name and the last name of the user. So we do have it limited to Toronto and New York, and once you start typing the user's name, then you can see we've reduced the size of the data quite dramatically with just a couple of selections of the filters. This makes it very easy to filter a large amount of data down to a small amount of data very quickly. This is the date filter, so any sort of information that includes dates would have this type of filter. Now this is just your standard sort of date picker, but it's important to provide filters that match the type of information that you're displaying. You want to make it easy for a person to choose values. Now, as I mentioned before, we didn't show any input boxes until the user actually wanted to do something with the user. So right here we have a user that has indicated they want to enroll this student. So they've clicked the green button over here. This is the enrollment button. And this panel pops down beneath them. This shows all the information that they need to enter now to enroll the user. So all of this information is hidden away until it's actually needed. This frees up a lot of space on the screen and reduces visual noise. But this information is needed, so you do have to have a way to enter it when you need it. Now, as I said, we wanted to be able to do bulk actions with a lot of different users. So here I've filtered the table down to users that have a city of Toronto. Now, if I wanted to, say, enroll everybody from Toronto, I would then click this Add All Search Results button here. And this has added everybody to this bulk assignment panel. So all the users that are now in Toronto are set aside for a bulk action. Now, when I click this Enroll button here, the same information that was showed in the table for a single user is now shown for every user. I can then set this information for all the users and enroll everybody at once without having to do it each individually. So this makes it a lot easier to work with a large amount of users, but because you could do this for a single user, it's also very easy to enroll a single user. And this is what I was talking about, where you want to test your workflow both with a lot of data and with a single user, or a small amount of data. You wouldn't, for example, want to force the user to add a single user to this bulk panel and then enroll in that way. That's just an additional step that's going to slow them down. So you want to provide a way to do individual checks for redoing some of these interfaces. It's proven to be a lot more flexible and a lot more powerful. It reduces server load a lot. You used to have pages that look with a lot of information. And this interface can display any amount of information very quickly. So thank you all for coming about interface scalability and what we've done with Alice. I hope it was useful to see this sort of project undertaken on a real-world app. Scalability will be an important factor in designing interfaces in the future. It's very important if you want to grow your application and provide. So thank you very much, and I do have a feedback form on the course to this session. So please tell me what you thought, whether you liked it or whether anything could be improved. And
Hello, this is Gareth on behalf of the iMoot team. Thank you very much indeed, James. Are there any questions? Obviously, put them in there and I'll stick around again. Thank you.